Welcome back, everyone. So we're back in the garage with the 94 Miata. So I thought I would take a little bit of time to talk about what this last season of driving this car has been like, what I've done to it, and also to provide a bit of an update to some of the videos I made previously to address two issues that I had with this car. Alright, so this car now has 70,000 miles on it, 70,099 to be exact. I bought it in the summer of 2018 with only 54.9, I think was the mileage back then. It's hard to believe that I've already put about 15,000 miles on this car. But then you realize that's over, an almost 3-year period. Not too bad. Not too bad. I don't really drive the car that much. I think I drive it to work once a week in the summer months. And we take it on occasional trips. Anytime we get ice cream, this is the car we use. So this year, I brought it on one particularly long trip. We went with some friends who own a BMW Z3. They're an older couple. They're in their, I think the wife is early 70s and the husband is late 60s. And recently got married. We're very happy for them. But we took them, they tailed us all the way to the racetrack in Saratoga Springs, New York. It was actually their idea, and we're like, yeah, let's do that. Let's go on a nice long trip. It was all back roads. We didn't take any highways. It was all, through the rural Vermont countryside and in Massachusetts, Vermont, and finally New York State. It was about a 4-hour drive one way, I think. Bit of a haul. And because we took back roads, it was especially challenging because anyone who's ever driven first generation Miata knows exactly how much power these cars do not have, especially when they're stock. But those are the choices I made. I decided I wanted to keep this car as stock as possible for a lot of reasons, actually. And I don't regret it for one bit. As a matter of fact, this is the first time I've brought this car to a car show. I think I brought it twice to a local car show. It's actually a pretty good gathering. Cars from all ages. Some pretty noteworthy ones, too. There was one particular car, and I found out that the owner actually lives just a stone's throw from here. But it was a car built for Dale Earnhardt. Not Junior, Dale Earnhardt. It was an old gasser racer car, an old race car, based on the Model T platform. But the car was a hand-built Bullet Roadster from the old days, built just before he passed away. And he never received the car. It got sold at auction, and this guy bought it. And he shows it over at that car show. But there's, a lot of fairly new Mustangs and Hellcats and, a lot of new stuff. But there's a lot of old stuff. This particular car show had, it's got a small group of Miatas. Seem to be the same ones every time I go there. One of them is a JDM Unos Roadster. And the rest of them are just stripper versions of this car with no options or just fairly beaten but enjoyed. That's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with a car that's been enjoyed and still on the road 30 years after it was built. It's actually kind of cool. I like that. I admire that. So, all right, let's do some follow-ups. So, if you've been watching my channel for a while, if you saw the earlier videos I made around the springtime and in the winter, we did all new suspension, except bushings. So one of the things I love about these mid-90s, early mid-90s Japanese cars is they were built well. And the Miata is no exception. It is a well-built car. That is, the materials used were very high quality, long-lasting. With the exception of rust, these cars could live forever. I know of some examples that have actually passed 400,000 miles on the original drivetrain. I don't know them firsthand, but I have heard of them. But they rust, especially up in the northern United States, where we salt our roads. The reason I bought this car in particular is because it had never seen snow, it had never seen salt, and you can always tell. You can always tell. If you look at the engine, and especially in the nooks and crannies and crevices, unless the original owner was a psychopath, you're going to have a little bit of corrosion on these castings. A little bit of corrosion, little dots of white. They start off as little dots of white. The brackets, well, this isn't a great example, but these brackets would be completely rusted. There'd be flaky rust on them, especially these. You would know. There'd be corrosion everywhere. This car has its original alternator, and it almost looks like it just came out of the box. Pretty impressive for a car with 70,000 miles on it. But again, it has never been driven in the snow. And as far as I can tell, it hasn't really been driven much in the rain either. I've taken it out many. It seems like every time we go out in this car, it rains. So we've been trapped in the rain a few times. But if it's raining outside, it stays in the garage. That's just how we do it. So some of the fixes that we made other than the suspension, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about the suspension. So I did all OEM equivalent KYB XLGs. Good choice, because the car rides like a factory Miata should ride. Stock ride height and stock, not spring rate, but stock damping force. What that means is the ride is pretty compliant. This car is not a race car. It doesn't go on the track on the weekend. This is not my. I'm not that kind of guy. I don't track my cars. I'm not a skilled racer either. So I wanted a ride that was as good as it would have been from the factory, and I think I achieved that goal. The nice thing about the stock suspension on this car is it is relatively compliant, but when you push it in the corners, and much to poor Amelia's horror, I do push it in the corners, and hey, you gotta have some fun, right? It holds. It is glued to the road. It does not have much in the way of body lean. Once you get to know the car, you know, those guys who run to the dealership and buy a brand new Mustang on Friday and end up in the hospital on Saturday, the mistake they're making is they're not taking the time to know their car, to know its limits, to know what it can handle. And I've had this car for 15,000 miles. I think I know what it can do. But anyway, so yeah, I do push it in the corners in a safe area, and it holds nicely. For tires, last spring, I put these Toyo Eclipses on here. The unfortunate thing is I am sticking with the stock wheel size, the 14-inch wheel, and there's not really much for performance tires in this wheel size. And that's unfortunate, because all I can get are all seasons. They're good. They do the job. Now, when this car had the tires that it came with when I bought it were a Chinese made tire, BKT or BCT or something like that. They were, or BTS. No, that's a Happy Meal, I think. Whatever. Whatever the case may be, they were junk. The car would squeal around corners. And they all had slow leaks too. I'd have to keep topping up the tires because there was a slow leak in every freaking tire. Now these are nice. I like these Eclipses. Not only do they look good in the car because they're not, the sidewall pattern isn't god awfully ugly and out there, but they do hold the road nice. As far as there's one small issue related to tires and suspension, and that is the car shakes at 65. Not like a cowl shake, but it's like a wheel out of balance issue. And I had that issue before I put these on, and I'm having it now. So in the springtime, we'll see how things go. Hopefully the pandemic doesn't spread too much and things start to... It's been a crazy year, my friends, and I don't want to get into that, but we'll see what happens. What I want to do is I want to bring it over to a tire shop, have them check the balance on all four tires, and adjust if necessary. I also want them to do to check while the wheels are on the balancing machine, check them for run out or bends. A bent wheel is an easy fix. Now, a lot of times in a car like this, you would just go to the junkyard, get another rim, because they're cheap. These wheels are cheap. The problem is, all the wheels that are for sale for these cars are in pretty bad shape. They're painted alloy wheels. And, they weren't meant to last 30 years. The whole car was only meant to last about 10 years or so, right? But the problem with these wheels is they tend to corrode. I always see them with, either they're painted black or they're badly corroded. And these have their original finish on them. And aside from a scratch on one of them, they're mint. So I will pay to have a wheel straightener come over and do their thing. Or I'll bring the wheel to a... little sidebar on that. My previous car, before I bought the Santa Fe, the 2014 Elantra GT that I bought new, I bent all four wheels on that car. All four wheels I bent within 5 years. And it cost me $600 to have them all straightened out. But they did a fantastic job. And the car rode smooth as glass like the day I bought it. And I bent them because of potholes, by the way. And where I live, we have terrible roads. And potholes are just, sometimes they're not avoidable. And that was the case with me. I hit so many potholes in that car. But anyway. What did I just step on? Oh. So let's get into it. So last year I did two no major repairs, but two things that were necessary to solve a few problems. Let's talk about that. Problem number one. It occurred exactly 1 year ago, this month. My mom was doing a book signing. She's starting to write children's books, and she was at a local bookstore. And, Amelia and I decided to be there for her, give her some moral support. I parked the car in front of the bookstore. We go in, we do our thing, take some pictures. We go to leave. I start the engine, and all of a sudden, I went to go hit the accelerator pedal, and the engine just felt like it was going to die. It was just... And then I took my foot off the accelerator and let it idle smoothly. Then it started stumbling, and then it smoothened out like nothing ever happened. Like, what are you doing? Make a liar out of me. Ran fine. Okay, good. I did it again. And I noticed a pattern. And it was still doing it early this spring before I fixed the problem. And what would happen is you start it up cold, it would run fine. It idles up, idle drops, normal tach. And go to accelerate, everything's good, everything's fine. Now, you do the same thing with the engine warm, and it wants to die. It just hesitates. Give it a minute, 30 seconds to a minute, idle time, let it warm up, it's good to go. So I did a little bit of research, but see, I'm not the kind of guy who likes to do the parts cannon approach where you just replace everything that you think is wrong, because some people do that because they just don't have the experience or diagnostic skills for that particular vehicle to solve the problem. And then I got to emphasize, because every vehicle's different. Every engine has its own quirks. You know, every engine management system has its own... every vehicle has that one part that goes bad, that causes this one problem. It could be anything, but it's usually this. So I did some digging, and I found that the coolant temperature sensor, which supplies the ECU with coolant temperature measurements that it uses to determine whether the engine is started cold or whether it's warm started. And with the wrong information, to put it simply, it feeds the wrong amount of fuel and may alter other engine settings for those temperature conditions that are not correct. Now, diagnosing that sensor is actually pretty simple. What you do is you remove it. You have to drain the cooling system to about this point here or so. I ended up draining the entire thing because the coolant had already been in there for more than 2 years, so I figured I should probably change it. So I drained the cooling system. What you do is you pull the sensor out and you put it in boiling water. Boiling water at sea level boils at, let me look it up, hold on. Water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, or freedom units. And so at 212 degrees, so when water boils, it stays at 212 because it releases heat in the form of steam. So it will stay at 212. It's a known baseline. You can check it with a thermometer if you want to. And you take your sensor, you dunk it in the boiling water, and then you measure the resistance across the two terminals, and that tells you what that sensor is reading at 212. And with that known measurement, you can determine whether the sensor is within or out of spec. I didn't do that. No, I decided that if I'm going to drain the cooling system, and I have to get my knuckles all bloody to shit just to get back there, to get the sensor out, just to test it, I might as well just put a new one in. So I did. I went over to my dealer. Believe it or not, within the pandemic, my local Mazda dealer had the correct sensor in stock, $50 cash and carry. I put it in. Bled the cooling system, filled it up with nice, fresh, new coolant. Drove it around for a little bit. Problem went away. Gone. Ran fine, but there was a new problem. And it developed shortly, it was almost simultaneously. This problem developed, and I'll tell you what that was now. So, normal operation, engine's idling, you press the AC button with the fan switch on. The idle speed jumps up as the compressor engages, and it stays there. And as you shut the compressor off, idle drops down, compressor shuts off. All of a sudden, it wasn't doing that anymore. And it had some other weirdness. Like the idle was never really consistent. It just kind of wandered a bit. Now, parts cannon approach must be the idle air control valve, or whatever the hell it's called in a Miata. The idle speed regulator, the bypass valve, whatever, every manufacturer calls it something else. So what I did was I did not go online and buy an idle air control valve. No. I recalibrated the throttle body. I knew that had to be done because of some other weirdness that the car had. The idle speed was weird when I bought it. Something wasn't right. It just wasn't right. And I noticed that the paint on this screw right here had been cracked. Somebody had adjusted the throttle or the idle speed with the throttle stop screw. There's a reason these are called no-touch screws. You don't touch them. What do you do with a no-touch screw? Well, I can tell you what you can't do, and that is to touch them. In other words, the throttle body is calibrated at the factory, I believe while it's on the car, possibly, and they tighten those screws and they seal it up. So what they're calibrating is they're calibrating the throttle position, the stop position, and they're calibrating it with the throttle position sensor as well, so that it all lines up. Everything is where it should be. So that is critical, because in order for the throttle position sensor to be adjusted correctly, the throttle plate has to be in a very precise location when it is at rest. Furthermore, at the same time, you want to adjust your idle speed with the idle speed adjuster screw here, and you want to adjust your ignition timing. It's all done at the same time with the timing light and a couple of feeler gauges. I had to buy one of the thinnest feeler gauges. I think it was, well, I'll just show you what I had to do. So in case you happen to have this problem, if your car is not running right, you want to get yourself a timing light with a TAC readout on it, a digital readout. That helped me immensely. And you want to find this reference sheet, MA007. You can look for this online. And if for whatever reason it cannot be found, I have a printed copy, and I will make sure I send this to you in a PDF. If this ever becomes unavailable online, I have it here, and I will send it to you in a PDF. This tells you how to adjust and calibrate your throttle body. Now, without this document, if this didn't exist, the actual fix for this problem, if somebody buys one of these cars and tampers with those screws, there was no solution. Once it's out of adjustment, it's essentially garbage. You have to now find another throttle body. So Mazda made this available for dealers for that very reason. Because a $450 throttle body over a slightly misadjusted screw is a little insane. So running this, or doing the necessary tasks that this document references, has solved that major problem of the idle being weird, just inconsistent, and it just so happened that the throttle kick-up feature was not functioning. Oddly enough, it was working for the power steering pump. So figure that out. The power steering pump also uses that same throttle, or the idle kick feature, when the pedal is, when you let your foot off the pedal and you turn the steering wheel, this little switch this is a pressure switch, by the way. That pressure switch senses line pressure, and if it senses pressure building up in the pump, it raises the idle speed. The real problem was this, and I'll just get down to the details, down to the brass tacks. The real issue was that the throttle position sensor was misadjusted, which caused the engine to run. It was not consistently running in idle mode. So with a throttle pedal off, with your foot off the pedal, there we go, and the throttle closed, it switches into idle mode. And if it's not in idle mode, or the computer doesn't think it's idling, it's basically thinking that you have the accelerator depressed a little bit. So it changes a few things. Amongst them, it changes the behavior of the idle air control valve. Okay. So the feeler gauge, this is what you need before you dig anywhere deeper. You need a 0.00, a 1/1000th of an inch, or a 0.025 millimeter feeler gauge. That's what you need. I actually went through 3 or 4 auto parts stores before I finally found that actual feeler gauge. So it can be done. And this reference guide tells you how to do everything. So keep that in mind. I think it also talks about how to get the timing adjusted correctly and set the correct idle speed. So that solved that problem. The engine, by the way, hasn't run better since. Let me rephrase that. It has run the best it has ever run under my ownership. After I took care of that sensor and the throttle position sensor adjustment and throttle stop screw adjustment. Absolutely, totally night and day. So I just want to make sure that you all are aware just how critical some of these adjustments are. Now, I'm going to go on a soapbox for a second. I don't like to do this because I don't like to get all preachy on this channel, because I am just a guy. I am not a mechanic, and I'm not always right. Some people never admit this. Scotty Kilmer. Anyway, just kidding. I don't mean to throw shade at Scotty Kilmer. I'm going to edit that out. So, I want to talk about the importance of using certain OEM parts. I'm a follower of a couple of YouTubers. Car Wizard is one of my favorites. That guy is amazing. Can we all just agree? He has the perfect demeanor. He's knowledgeable, and he's willing to admit when he's wrong. Those are qualities that you want in a mechanic. He's honest. Absolutely, I would trust him with my life. Just watching how he interacts with his customers and how he treats their cars, I would, if he were local to me, I would have him do things to my cars that I don't want to do. I would trust him unquestionably. Now, I also watch a guy, Uncle Tony's Garage, UTG. Uncle Tony's Garage, he's just I think he's more of a hobbyist. And he builds race cars and builds engines, and he actually bought an older Miata like this one, and it was a kind of a basket case. So what do you do with a basket case? You have fun with it. He actually chopped the firewall out so we could fit a Chrysler Slant 6 engine in the damn thing. A Slant 6 carbureted engine. Why not, right? Well, he also he tries to educate people on things that he learns, and that's what I try to do as well. He's the one who got me kind of thinking about this. Auto parts from the auto parts store. Points, condensers, ignition parts, store brand components like brake rotors, and just the run-of-the-mill parts that we used to take for granted. You know, you got the family car, you're not taking it racing or anything. You just want to put brakes on it. So you go to the auto parts store, you buy the Duralast brakes or the Wherever brakes or whatever the local or the chain's house brand happens to be. When you need ignition parts, where do you go? You go to the auto parts store. I need a cap and rotor for my 97 Mazda 66. That was the last car I ever bought a cap and rotor for, by the way. Or you need whatever parts you need. You just go to the parts store. You buy whatever they have. Or nowadays you go on Amazon and you buy a distributor. You buy a seal. You buy whatever. Unless you're buying OEM parts, you really don't know what you're getting. And when it comes to things like sensors, they're the biggest offenders. And Car Wizard actually talks about this as well, mainly in the way and as it pertains to sensors. Like one shining example is your mass airflow sensors. Unless you're buying an OEM sensor from the dealer, from the factory, from whoever can obtain an original part from the original manufacturer, unless you're doing that, you are really wasting your time and your money. Because most of the sensors that the auto parts stores are selling under whatever brand of the week they're using that time, they're from China. You know, they're from they're not made to the same standards as the original equipment part was made to. And this isn't an opinion, this is a fact. Sensors, oxygen sensors especially, but oxygen sensors, temperature sensors, mass airflow sensors, caps and rotors. Maybe if you stick with Bosch and NGK, you're okay with ignition parts, but when it comes to that other stuff, you're just not helping the situation. Now, this especially hits folks who are going with the parts cannon approach, where car doesn't run right, so you just point to something and replace it. Sometimes, you know what? Sometimes that's just what you do. You're desperate, and you've got a few bucks to spend on parts, and you're just like, you know what? I'm just going to do this. I'm going to do that. If that doesn't fix it, I'll do that. That's called the parts cannon approach. You just throw money at it until it runs right. But here's what can happen. Let's say it's not. Let's just take a step back. Let's just say that my engine wasn't running correctly, as it wasn't, and I'm just running through my non-mechanic brain, and I'm thinking, well, you need gas, fuel. We're getting air. Maybe it's reading the wrong amount of air. Maybe my mass airflow sensor's bad. So I go to Advanced Auto Parts, and they happen to sell a mass airflow sensor for a 94 Miata. And it's like $50 or whatever. And they have to order it. So I get the part, they send it, for whatever reason, they send it to the store, so I have to drive to the store to get it, but that's another conversation for another day. I put that mass airflow sensor in my car, plug it in, and it might work. It might change the running condition a little bit, but ultimately it didn't fix my problem. So I take the sensor out, and I'm thinking, well, maybe it didn't fix my problem, so I bring it back to the store. They won't give me my money back because it's an electronic part. You didn't know that, did you? Yeah. You break it, you bought it, you open the package, you own it. That's it. No returns. So I wasted $50. Or let's go through flowchart B. Let's say it doesn't change anything, but I'm thinking, well, you know what? It's a new sensor, so whatever. I'll just point to something else, and maybe I'll replace the spark plugs or the injectors. So now I got an aftermarket sensor in my airbox over there. My engine's still not running right, so now I'm replacing. I put a set of injectors on it, thinking it's got to be injectors. Maybe they're sticking, maybe they're leaking, and it's running too rich on startup. Hey, it's plausible, right? Well, now I go. Where do I get injectors? Well, Advanced doesn't sell them, so I go on Amazon. I go to Amazon. I buy a set of injectors from Amazon, put them in. So I still have the root problem. I've wasted $50 here, and I've bought a Chinese knockoff mass airflow sensor. I bought Chinese knockoff fuel injectors, and my engine's still not running right. I'm like, what do I do now? So I go and I find my video. I find a video that this guy in New Hampshire made about how to adjust or how to replace the coolant temperature sensor. And I'm thinking, great, coolant temperature sensor. That's got to be it. I go to O'Reilly's. I buy a coolant temperature sensor. Brand name is Wells or some bullshit. I put it in. Car's running better. Great. A week later, the Chinese mass airflow sensor fails. And I'm thinking, now, it fails, but the problem is it's a bit different. When a mass airflow sensor fails, it can throw an engine light. This is OBD1, so it could do that. Or it just malfunctions sometimes. So, meanwhile, I've got a knockoff set of injectors, a knockoff coolant temperature sensor, and I'm just lost. Car is not running at all. What now? Is it one of the parts I replaced? Yes, it is, but I don't know that. Or is it something else? Did something else fail? So now I'm really going down a rabbit hole. Now I'm like, maybe the ECU's bad. So I go online and I find a company that rebuilds ECUs. So I send my ECU, which is legit, by the way. So I send my ECU out to East Texas. They send it back. The car still doesn't run right. And I'm out how many hundreds of bucks and time and energy. So my point is, number one, do your research. Find out what the problem is more than likely in that particular vehicle. And number two, avoid knockoff parts, because that mass airflow sensor that failed, that's a big one right there. But I guess my point is, further down the line, those eBay injectors or Amazon injectors that you bought for $50 or $100, one of them could stick, or they could be introducing way too much fuel because they're made to zero quality control standards. And by doing that, you could foul your catalytic converter very quickly. That coolant temperature sensor, that might last 15,000 miles, it might last 20,000 miles, it might last 500 miles. Spend a little more, get the one from the dealer. Mass airflow sensors are not something you want to mess with. You want to stick with OEM. If your OEM sensor fails and you can't get a new one, or it's $400, $500, $600, by all means, go to a pick and pull or go to a junkyard. You're better off sometimes with a junkyard part than you are with a brand new one from O'Reilly's or Amazon. As for injectors, never replace injectors unless you know they're bad. And there's easy ways to tell. In my case, I contacted a local diesel shop. I actually had them checked because it just one of those things that was in my mind, like maybe I should have them checked because the car is almost 30 years old. The car sits for months on end. So having injectors that are dirty can cause a lot of problems. So what I wanted to do was, rather than replace them, I wanted to know, are they good? Are they bad? Do they need to be cleaned? So I brought mine to a local diesel mechanic. And I said, can you test these? And they said, absolutely. So they put them on their testing rig. They ran some kind of solution through them. And they checked them for flow rate. And they said they're fine. They didn't even charge me for clean. They said, we don't even need to clean these. Your injectors are A-okay. I said, thank you very much. The place, if you're in New Hampshire, I don't remember the name of the company, but they're in Bow, New Hampshire. So check them out. Good place, good, honest shop. So I put those back in with nice, fresh, new seals and moved on with my testing. But I did the injector test because of how the car lives. It sits for months. And before I bought it, it sat for 4 years. So that excessive sitting and not driving can cause buildup. It can cause varnishes, hard varnishes, to build up in those injectors. So in my case, I didn't just go out and buy new ones. I just had them checked, and turns out they were fine. But again, certain things you just don't want to go with aftermarket if you can help it. And if you have to go aftermarket, consider a junkyard. Oxygen sensors especially. You want to stick with the exact same part that the car was built with, because everything is calibrated and engineered for that particular sensor. And if you throw a different sensor in, you could be introducing more problems. In my case, the original sensor was still good, but I replaced it. I forget why. I didn't need it. But I ordered one from... I bought it from Parts Geek, actually. And it's the OEM equivalent Denso sensor. It was a little pricey, but oxygen sensors are one of those components that they can go for 200,000 miles. But I figured it wouldn't hurt to throw in a new one. The thing is, I had the exhaust apart, and I had to take the sensor out anyway. So I figured, why not just put a new one in? So that's what I did. As for filters, no, you don't have to go to the dealer to buy your filters and your spark plugs and your plug wires. But you want to stick with what the car initially left the factory with. General wisdom is this. If you have a vehicle with a Bosch ignition system, stick with Bosch plugs and wires. If yours has NGK or Denso, stick with one of those two. I use NGK plugs and wires in this because they are as good as the Densos. And price-wise, I think they're about the same. This is another one that a lot of people don't think about is the type of plug used. I'm finding that copper plugs are starting to get harder to find because everything uses platinum now, platinum or even iridium. So none of my local parts stores had copper plugs for this engine. Instead, what they were doing is they were substituting copper with platinums. Now, platinum plugs will work in this engine, but the ignition system was designed for copper. There is a slight difference in there, and it's almost a religious scenario. But so I didn't notice this until this year. I figured out that I didn't realize I had platinums in this engine. So I went back and I ordered a set of 4 new copper NGKs. The copper NGKs don't last as long as the platinums, but that's irrelevant. I just want the engine to run correctly. And while I didn't notice a difference, and I didn't expect to, I feel better. And besides, copper plugs are cheaper. But they don't sell them in the stores because they haven't made a car that runs coppers, at least not an everyday vehicle, for quite some time. Actually, no. I think Hyundai's, the Hyundai Accent was one of the last vehicles they sold that used copper plugs. But they're not as common. And they are very short-lived. They're like 30,000-mile plugs or less. Another thing is, I don't want to get too far on this rant soapbox thing, but when it comes to fluids, it's also critical to put the right stuff in. I know that, especially now, transmission fluids, you don't just go and buy Dextron Mercon from your local parts counter and stick it in your Hyundai or your Mitsubishi or your Nissan. Every manufacturer has their own transmission fluid now. Chrysler was notorious for their transmission fluid. You use Chrysler or you replace the transmission. You choose which one you want to do. But for the Miata, and this is not necessarily common knowledge, but it should be. If you have a Miata with a 5 or 6 speed manual transmission made, I don't know how far in you want to, I think even up to current models. Or maybe until they stopped using Ford transmissions, but it doesn't use a Ford transmission, but it does use Motorcraft full synthetic manual transmission fluid, believe it or not. This is what you want to use in your Miata. Now remember, when the Miata was developed, the company did have a partial ownership from Ford. Ford owned a pretty good-sized chunk of Mazda when this car was designed. As a matter of fact, it has a Motorcraft airbag control module under the dash. The same part, by the way, that they used in the Ford Econoline van. Funny. But no, seriously, use Motorcraft. Get this from the Ford dealer. Full synthetic manual trans fluid. So when I bought the car, I made the mistake of bringing it to a local shop and having them change the transmission fluid and the rear diff fluid. There is no front diff, but the differential fluid. I had them both changed. And they used Valvoline, I think it was 75, 90, or whatever the weight is. Same weight. But that's what they used, because that's what they have. And I noticed that it was shifting kind of rough after that. I'm like, what the hell did they do? I went online and I did some research and I found out that, yes, it matters. It really matters on this car. And it has to do with the way the synchros or the material that they use to build the synchros. You got to use Motorcraft transmission fluid, transmission oil. In the rear, you can use, because this has the Torsen limited slip diff, you can use 75, 90 synthetic. It doesn't matter, and that's what I use in the rear. But for the transmission, you got to use the Motorola stuff. So Motorcraft. Anyway, so yeah, you gotta pay attention to the fluids that you put in your car, even coolant. Now this uses standard green coolant, nothing special. But if you want a Volkswagen, Volkswagens are especially sensitive. You have to use, when I had my Volkswagen, it was Pentacin. If you didn't go to the dealer to buy their fluid, you could buy, or coolant, you could buy the Pentacin fluid from the third-party parts counters. Pentacin, it was a phosphate-free, and it was blue. The same color as windshield washer fluid, which is not confusing at all. But yeah, power steering fluid, that matters. For this car, I believe it's just Dextron Mercon transmission fluid. That's what's in there now, and it's working just fine. If you go to Volkswagen, you got to use their mineral oil. They use mineral oil as power steering fluid. It was $20 a quart back when my sister had her Jetta. Yeah, that's a bit much, huh? Hyundai. I've owned 3 of them. Hyundai uses a Mitsubishi SPF Diamond SPF 3. I don't know if that's still current or not, but back when I had mine, it was a Mitsubishi Diamond SPF 3 transmission fluid. If you used anything else, the transmission would self-destruct very quickly. And I think it goes without saying that if you have a CVT in your car, you gotta use CVT fluid. Now, when I had my Nissans, there was no aftermarket CVT fluid. You had to get it from Nissan. And a lot of people I talked to about this didn't quite get it, and they got all mad. They're like, well, you don't need to go to the dealer. You have rights. I'm like, yeah, I have a right not to fry my transmission. Nobody sold, and nobody, at the time, nobody really understood CVT transmissions. So I heard so many horror stories about, on the forums and elsewhere, that people would take their Muranos and their Versas and their new Sentras, and they'd bring them to Valvoline to get a transmission flush, and the car the whole transmission would lock up as they're leaving the facility. That can happen, and unfortunately your warranty is void. I don't know if the shop has any liability for that, but you're going to be in a world of hurt. A very expensive world of hurt, mind you. But yeah, you got to be careful. Toyota, by the way, has their own coolant. It's red. And what makes these coolants different? Generally, it's, as far as I understand it, is a couple of things. But one of them is is whatever chemical or whatever material is used for anti-corrosion. Silicates. Back in the old days, back in the 50s and 60s, 70s, they used silicates, or silicate, which is a fine sand, for anti-corrosion. What it would do is, it was like sandpaper, really. And as this stuff flowed through the block, which back then they were iron blocks, this was an iron block engine too, what they would do is the silicate stuff would actually remove corrosion as it was being formed. So if it started to corrode, this fluid had a slight abrasive quality to it, and it would remove the corrosion or the rust from the passages, keeping them clean. Little fun sidebar. I got into a lot of arguments with folks on the Honda scooter forums, because this is why I don't do forums anymore, because people like to argue. They think you're wrong, and they will do everything they can to try to discredit you. But I made a statement that you had to use, just to be safe, just buy the Honda coolant for your Honda scooter, because this way there's no question that this coolant will not destroy the water pumps in these engines. And what would happen is people would buy the old-fashioned green coolant, which had silica in it, and their water pumps, the water pump seals would burn up. And I tried to explain that it's because of the silica, it was eroding the pump seals, and it causes leaks. Nobody wanted to believe me. Okay, fine. That's your right to do so. So people were trying to find automotive equivalents, that were the same product. But I'm like, I'll pay the $12 for the quart. It's good for a couple of years. I'm not gonna miss that $12. I spent more than that on breakfast this morning. Just people are afraid of dealers. They're afraid of spending money at the dealer. They think that buying something at the dealer is like admitting defeat. And they're going to lose their man card or their woman card or whatever card they're carrying that day. And they're going to get ripped off. People automatically think that buying anything from a dealer means you're getting ripped off. You're gonna pay too much. You're gonna get ripped off. When it comes to fluids or parts, I mean, whatever. It's a few dollars more. Dealers, yes, dealers will charge more than Amazon for their stuff. They have a lot more overhead, and they're in the business to make money. So, I mean, what do you want? They're trying to make a buck, yes. But they're not trying to screw you. They're just in the business to make a few bucks, and they don't make their money from people coming in off the side of the street buying parts off the parts counter. That's not where they make their money. They make their money when somebody buys a car or brings a car in for service. That's how they make their money. And independent shops make a lot of money for them. The parts department at a dealership sells bazillions of parts to independent shops. And that is a major profit maker for them. And the independent shops don't pay what you pay when you walk in the front door. They pay less because they buy in volume. They buy a lot of, they get special discounts for parts. So yes, as a consumer, if you go to the dealer and buy a part or a bottle of fluid or a windshield wiper, you're going to pay more than the shop down the road that makes their money from charging you to install those parts, but buys the parts from the same source. Does it all make sense? I hope so. Of course, anything I've just said in the past hour or so is irrelevant if you're modifying your engine and you know what you're doing. If you're racing if you're building a race engine, I mean, yeah, you already know more than I do, and you know what you're doing. But for most people, my any advice I give is for the general public and not for those who are trying to modify their engines, because the average person just wants this thing to start up on a Sunday morning so they can go for a nice cruise, or to go pick up the kids with the top down and the AC blasting, because why not? Gas is cheap, right? But no, honest to God though, yeah, it's there's a lot of if you go in the forums, man, one of the things I get a lot on my channel, so I took my scooter repair videos down following a pretty gnarly accident that I was in. I just didn't want to deal with scooters or motorcycles anymore. I was done with it. And I got a lot of people who still ask me, where do I get parts for my Honda Helix or my Suzuki FA50 or FZ50 or this or that? And my answer is always the same. Have you called the dealer? Nobody thinks to do that. I found, this is just an observation of mine. Most people don't think, it doesn't even cross their mind that, wait, you mean I can go to that store right there and buy parts for this 30-year-old motorcycle? Come on. No, really, you can. And it's like an open secret. You could just walk into the store and say, I need a carburetor for a 1987 Honda Helix. Why would they have that part? They're a dealership. Well, because parts are a big money maker for the automakers and the motorcycle manufacturers. They've got they have parts for 40-year-old machines sitting in warehouses all over the country. I shit you not. Very few parts. Let me rephrase that. I had good luck with most of the parts for my Honda Helix when I was still riding that. Most of the parts I got from an actual Honda dealer. Can you believe it? Yes. God is my witness. I had excellent luck. I needed a rubber seal. I need an engine gasket. I need a hose. I need a clamp. I need a bolt, a nut, a screw, a cap. You name it, they had it. Now, they didn't have it in stock. No, it's like I said, these parts are sitting in warehouses, and only the dealer can sell those parts. They can get that part for you. If you have, doesn't matter what it is. It can be an antique. If there is a dealer in your area, and if you don't want to, all right, so you don't have a Honda dealer in your area, you can go online. A lot of the Honda dealers and Suzuki dealers and Yamaha dealers and Piaggio, they sell parts on the internet too. The one that I use, so here's the deal. So I couldn't buy the parts at my local dealer at a discount because they didn't offer that. But there were some parts that I bought because I needed them. I needed a clutch bell one time. I needed a drive belt for my Helix, and I didn't want to wait for shipping both ways. So I went to my dealer. I had it in 2 or 3 days. If I bought it at a discount from an internet parts source like Beaver Dam Honda, which is now Power Sports Company, I think, out of Wisconsin, they would have to have the parts shipped from the Honda warehouse to their facility where they would repack it and send it to me. So it took a little bit longer. But that's how I did it. And I didn't go on Amazon. I still, to this day, do not have an Amazon account. Do you believe that? It's true. I don't. I do not have an Amazon account. I have an eBay account that I've had since I was 16. But most of my eBay transactions are from private sellers. You know, not from companies that just sell stuff on eBay for fun. You know, some guy's got a brand new old stock widget on his shelf in his house and he wants to sell it. He puts it on eBay and I buy it from him. But for the most part, folks, most of my parts come from dealers. Now, this car here, it will be foolish to buy spark plugs, plug wires, tires, brake parts, you know, normal service stuff. I don't buy that stuff from the dealer because I can get that stuff from online auto parts stores such as I've been buying a lot of parts from partsgeek.com, and they're not I'm not getting paid to say this, but I've had great luck. A lot of my parts that I can't get at the local parts stores, and I wouldn't buy from a dealer because I don't want to pay that much money. And I'm talking service parts, not repair parts. There's a difference there. But I buy them from Parts Geek, and I've had amazing luck with those guys. Pretty quick shipping. The custom stuff that I've done to this car, the splash guards, the center console modification. I love this, by the way. The stereo mount. Actually, no, that came from Crutchfield. But the center console, which, by the way, if you don't have one of these in your NA Miata, you're missing out. This is the best thing I ever did. A little pricey, but you know what? Whatever. I got dough, right? So I bought that. I bought the splash guards. I bought new vent balls. The original ones they wouldn't stay in place, so I bought all new ones. All that shit came from Moss Miata. Moss Motors sells parts for British cars, and the Miata line is just a side hustle for them. But they sell a lot of parts for the Miatas, custom parts, and even some performance stuff. But anyway, I think that's all we have time for right now, and I think that's a little bit too much to put into one video. So thank you for watching. The season's coming to a close. This car is going to be put away very soon, and I had a lot of fun with it this year, and I hope I have many more years with this car before it finally fails in an uneconomical way, in which case it would make a hell of a body donor for some kind of custom roadster or something. But anyway, until then, have a great day.